Hi, everybody. Welcome to English 11. I am Miss Wellman, and today we are talking about Gothic literature, which is actually one of my most favorite genres of literature. So I will try to be as concise as possible with this lesson, but I can't fully promise that there won't be like one or two tangents I go down. Just because this is, again, just one of my favorite genres. I think it's so interesting. And I really hope that after today, you guys also have, if not a love for it, at least a sprinkling of appreciation. The reason that we're going over this is because Mary wrote in the Romantic era, and her story, Frankenstein, it does have some romantic elements to it, but there's also a lot of Gothic that's in it as well. And so it's really important to make sure that we um, know about this genre that we're reading to kind of help better understand the story itself, but also some of like Mary's motivations and how she wrote it. So, um, before we get too much into that, a reminder that today the required reading is to get through chapters 5 and 6. The time to get through both of them, according to what I have in the lesson intro notes from the YouTube link that I've got posted, is that it should be about 40 minutes. So kind of take that into account as you're trying to get through your lessons and other classes and stuff today too, that there's about 40 minutes of reading to get done. And then there is this lesson to go through. And at the very end, there is a quick check. And the quick check does have questions about chapters 5 and 6. It will also have questions about this presentation too. So make sure that if you're watching it or if you're reading it, make sure that you are paying attention because there will be questions about it later. So make sure that you are locked in because there is a lot to go through, but it's going to be so fun. So I know there's a lot on this agenda, but it goes through really quick in the first couple parts. So I want us to talk about the origin of the word Gothic and look more into Gothic literature's roots and like as in the roots of like the word Gothic, where it started, things like that. And then we're going to talk about the essential elements of Gothic literature. We'll talk about Gothic horror versus Gothic romance, explore some additional elements of Gothic romance, and look at examples of Gothic romance and Gothic horror. So it does seem like a lot, but once we get through it, it'll go pretty quick. Again, as long as I stay on task. So that being said, we'll look into the origin of the word Gothic first. So Gothic, the term, was actually coined from 12th century architecture that was originated in France, but it did spread throughout several European countries. And it's a, quote, style of European style of masonry that values height, intricacy, sizable windows, and exaggerated arches. And that's from an article about Gothic architecture. So when I use the word Gothic architecture, think about something like Notre Dame Cathedral. It is large. There are really huge windows. There are intricate arches, things like that. There's also the Sistine Chapel. That's Gothic architecture. So is Westminster Abbey. And so is Canterbury Cathedral. So all of these are historical buildings that are in the Gothic style from the 12th century. So that would be like circa the 1100s. Around the 1100s. So in the Gothic style, the building itself looks like kind of an intimidating castle-like structure on the outside, but on the inside, they're bright and beautiful, again, with high arched ceilings and just breathtaking stained glass. So that's kind of the vibe of Gothic architecture. And the word Gothic is like the key piece here, and it'll make more sense when I get to this next part. So think about Gothic, think about that word, and then let's talk about Gothic literature's roots. So the first Gothic story was written in 1764, and it was called The Castle of Otranto, a Gothic story. So, Horace Walpole, sorry, he is the one author who wrote the story, and he chose to use the word Gothic in there because he knew that the Gothic style was old. Again, it's from the 1100s. He's writing in the 1700s, so that's like 600 years ago. And he used this word Gothic, to suggest that the story was an antique relic, even though it was a fictional story. But he really wanted to make this story seem almost like spookier because it was so old, so ancient. That's a quote from Gothic Literature, an article that I read for this. But yeah, he just wanted to make the story seem older than it was. That was the goal. So again, he used the word Gothic to make the story seem old, to make it seem like it was 600 years old, as opposed to literally writing it in the 1700s. And then, because of him using that term Gothic, because of the story's contents in the book, this Gothic genre was created. And again, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. We won't go too in depth, but Gothic literature comes out of the Romantic era, which stems from 1785 to 1832. And specifically, Gothic literature stems from dark romanticism, which is a subgenre of romanticism. And from another article, while romanticism celebrates emotions, nature, and the inherent goodness of humanity, dark romanticism challenges these notions by exploring the darker aspects of human nature, such as sorrow, insanity, and moral corruption. So, dark romanticism is what really explored sorrow, insanity, moral corruption. They looked into those darker aspects of human nature, humanity. And Gothic literature kind of took that and ran. So again, darker elements of the human psyche are drawn on in dark romanticism, and Gothic literature took that but did it one step further. So yes, we've got sorrow, insanity, moral corruption, things that aren't great, obviously. And then Gothic literature took those things and pushed them further by adding elements of like horror and terror and death, omens, supernatural, damsels in distress. They threw all of these other things in there to kind of make it like from a like sorrow this actually happens type thing to more of like an exaggerated sense of that. The Gothics just kind of exaggerated those feelings more so than in the dark romanticism genre. So, some essential elements of Gothic literature are mystery and fear. So, mystery and fear sets the tone of the novel. It could be, it is some mystery in the novel that the reader is not privy to until towards the very end, like the grand reveal of it. The sense of mystery and fear creates suspense, and it keeps the reader on their toes. And then fear is created in sinister surroundings, creepy character, and monstrous moments. I found this really cool graphic for all of these on invaluable.com. So I got that cred linked right here. But an example of mystery and fear, we got it in Frankenstein, and Shelley includes graveyards, gloomy castles, and a frightening monster to emphasize the fear factor. And then this is just a quote from Frankenstein, which, just for the sake of making this under 30 minutes, because that's what time I have to be able to record this, I won't read the quote, but you can pause and read if you want to. But anyway, so that's how Mary Shelley is using, again, fear, mystery and fear in her novel through her setting and through the monster, through the creatures, I prefer to call them. Anyway, we also have an unnerving atmosphere. So generally, are it's found in the setting of the novel, and there can be a crumbling cemetery, sorry, a crumbling castle or a creepy cemetery, maybe a mysterious monastery. But it's a place where you really do judge a book by its cover in this unnerving atmosphere. This place looks scary, vibes are off, Scooby Doo level shenanigans are afoot. Um, it's all very intentional where things are written as they are. Like you're supposed to be unnerved, and that's why the setting is the way it is in this kind of story. And it just helps the author to create feelings of suspense, fear, mystery, playing into other important aspects of this genre, which we'll keep going into. Um, so, an example of a unnerving atmosphere is found in Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. And Walpole sets his novel in an old castle with a mysterious past and secret underground passages. So the castle already has kind of a sketchy background, and then with it kind of being really old, that adds to the like unnerving aspect of it. Another key factor or feature is supernatural or paranormal activity. So this is a really key aspect in what or element in what distinguishes Gothic literature from dark romanticism. So using supernatural creatures like vampires or werewolves, my cat's yelling at me, winds that howl and inhuman shadows are some just different ways that people use that supernatural element in their Gothic literature. While both genres delve into the darker side of humanity or the darker side of human psyche, the Gothics distinguish themselves by this addition of some otherworldly element. And that's a little bit spooky. So an example of this is in Stoker's Dracula. And Stoker uses vampires and werewolves, eerie shadows, and howling winds to create a fear of the unexplainable. So, again, using that supernatural element as a really big and defining feature in our Gothic literature. Another key feature is having omens and curses. So, they help further define Gothic literature. They add to the fear factor, and it dips into the supernatural without being a full plunge. So your ghosts, goblins, ghouls, not included with your omens and curses. Omens can come in the form of disturbing dreams, unexplained events, or ravens knocking at your window. And curses can come in the form of a crumbling family home, sickness, or monkey's paw. Lots of options with curses, so many. Um, and if you can't find a cursed object, generational curses will do. In Nathaniel Hawthorne's The House of Seven Gables, we have one of those said generational curses, where Hawthorne creates a chill by cursing a family whose ancestors stole land from a man he had hanged. So, in this story, this man who was hung cursed the family of this person, the main character, um, because the family wrongfully stole his land and he cursed them for it. So, there's an example of a curse in a Gothic story. Oh, and it's also, sorry, from the House of Seven Gables. So, another important feature that also can talk a little bit with tying into omens is having nightmares. So, nightmares help fuel the proverbial fire, adding layers of fear and suspense and mystery. They can be a prediction or an omen of what's to come, and they serve as a tool for the protagonist and readers. So these nightmares, they can feed information to the protagonist for them to use later, which we'll see in our example in a minute. They can also be like repressed memories, or give information to the character that's not available to them unless given by like a mysterious outside force, which we do see in other Gothic novels. So, in the example of Stephen King's Bag of Bones, which is a newer Gothic book, but King incorporates nightmares to depict daunting visions of death while including that of his character's wife. So the main character in this story keeps having nightmares about his wife's death, and she died very mysteriously, and the nightmares actually end up telling him how she died, and gives the without spoiling the dreams give the main character an idea of why things are happening to him through these nightmares, and again, they're all about his wife's death. So, that's again an example of just nightmares being used in a Gothic novel. Another key feature of a Gothic novel is to have emotional distress. So, you add all of these things like fear and omens and nightmares and supernatural creatures, put all of them together, and you've got one person who is severely distressed in the simplest terms. And that emotional distress gives you character, but it also gives you very impassioned speeches of people could be suffering from madness, or scenes with really just high emotions. This emotional distress, the 1800s, which is mostly when they're 1800s, 1700s, they didn't have the same vocabulary or understanding of the human psyche that we do now. And so they weren't able to categorize what we would now call like mental illnesses. They kind of all fell under this huge umbrella of emotional distress. And as you know, we read as readers in 2025, like we'll see what characters are going through, and we'll be like, that's like this thing, and like have a psychological term for it. But back in the day, there really wasn't that. And to better provide like an explanation of what I mean by emotional distress, but having an actual term for it. In our example, in the book or in the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, we have her character in emotional distress, where Gilman uses a series of highly emotional diary entries written by a woman suffering from what we now call as postpartum depression, but back then it would be called hysteria, distress, things like that. But we're going to look into this woman's very impassioned writing, and she's under severe emotional distress. And again, we would call it postpartum now, but that is not what the word was back then. And so that's what I mean by like, we'll see this distress and we'll have the vocabulary for it, but there wasn't that vocabulary when it was being written. So just kind of something to keep in mind as we do read that. They just didn't have the same terms that we have now, but it's all under the umbrella of emotional distress in our Gothic literature. There's always a villain in Gothic literature, and so Gothic villains are complicated though. Usually, not all the time, but usually they are very powerful men, and they're like aristocrats again, usually charming and handsome, but not always quite what they seem. They're not bad to everyone, but they can be extremely horrible to certain people, or like mostly our protagonists in the story. But a lot of our Gothic villains do gain the reader's sympathy, and some do keep it. And we see that just in different stories. And our Gothic villains can sometimes be synonymous or have a lot of similarities to an anti-hero. So, a villain, notable villain from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Bronte's character, Edward Rochester, starts with a brutish manner but is driven to immoral behavior. So, Rochester is the main character in Jane Eyre. He is kind of Jane Eyre's love interest. And you would think that would kind of make him a good guy, but he does have a lot of really not great qualities, like locking his wife in the attic for one. And really, Rochester would show more as an anti-hero than a villain, which is kind of what this image got wrong from this website. But he is not a good guy, but he does end up getting the girl in the end. But he has a lot of kind of what we would think is like reprehensible stuff in the novel. Again, like locking his wife in a attic and lying to his future wife about being married and this whole thing. It's a lot of drama. But anyway, speaking of anti-hero, an anti-hero is a protagonist of a drama or narrative who is notably lacking in heroic qualities, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's someone who the narrative revolves around, who's not inherently good, but also not bad, like totally all bad. There's good things to them. They might do questionable things, might engage in activities of moral speculation, but the story is told from their perspective. So then, obviously, with the story being told from their perspective, they have the reader's ear, the reader's sympathy, and the reader can see how the anti-hero goes from point A to point B, which does typically lend to, again, like sympathy because you understand where they're coming from. So um that's why I say earlier that there can be sympathy with our villains or our anti-heroes because we do get to see things from their perspective, if the book is from their point of view. Example of an anti-hero is from The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and Wilde creates a very handsome gentleman who quickly transcends into an anti-hero through his immoral pursuits. Which I'd actually argue that we'd flip Rochester and the main character of Dorian Gray, because Dorian's grades are a little bit more reprehensible than what some of the things Rochester did. But anyway, again, another example of villainy anti-heroism from a very great, by the way, great book in Gothic literature. We also get from this era with the anti-hero, we also get the Byronic hero, named after Lord Byron. A lot for his personality, and I could do a whole other thing about Lord Byron. He is a fascinating character. But for the sake of brevity, the Byronic hero was named after him because very similar to him. And also named after the characters that he typically wrote. So Byronic heroes are very flawed, but they're also very hard to hate. They can have a violent temper. They can have a seductive nature. They can be cynical, sinister, harbor secrets and desires, prideful, moody, and vengeful. Like, not all really great things, but they can also be capable of deep, strong affection, have a tortured soul. They can be crying out for compassion, and are viewed as solitary, suffering beings wanting of love. Again, from the article, A Glimpse of the Gothic Hero, or Gothic, the Gothic Romance. Anyway, they're also can be seen as like a fallen angel. So the Byronic hero is also prevalent in a lot of Gothic literature as well. The main difference between Byronic heroes and anti-heroes is that they're similar in the fact that they're protagonists and not normal hero types. But the contrast is that an anti-hero is very self-serving, whereas Byronic heroes try to be good, but they never feel like they are good enough, is the main part with those. And then every Gothic story has romance, like some romantic plot. It's not the overall theme, unless it's a Gothic romance story, but it does play a key role in it. And it's something like, a woman's romantic interest saves her from an evil monk, a man and his fiance go off to kill a vampire, or the hero turns into an anti-hero after losing the woman that he loves. So there is some aspect of love and romantic subplot or plot in Gothic stories. Another example by another Bronte sister, Emily Bronte, is Wuthering Heights, and Bronte's character, Catherine and Heathcliff, they fall in love, the romance grows, and it's ultimately sabotaged by both of their families. So their romance is a big part of that plot, but there's a lot of heartbreak to it before anything good really comes of it at the end. And then we also have a damsel in distress in Gothic stories. So usually they're women of lower social standing in comparison to the male lead. And her story centers around marital or social status. So she might be engaged to a Byronic hero. Maybe she's the governess for a mysterious lord's two children. And her ending typically is either very tragic or it's triumphant. So either she comes to an unfortunate end to further along the protagonist story, or she overcomes the antagonist and ends up with her love interest. That's really kind of the only two outcomes for women in Gothic literature. And also like in just literature kind of at the time too and things like that. But mostly in this like genre, like there's one or two ways it's going to go basically for female characters and specifically damsels in distress in these types of novels. An example would be from Gregory Lewis's The Monk, where Lewis creates a vulnerable virginal character, Antonia, who is both desired and like degraded in the sense that like people treat her very poorly for different things, which we won't get. This book, The Monk, is really good, but it's not one that I'd recommend as like a intro into the genre at all. And we are running out of time significantly. So we'll touch briefly on this Gothic horror versus Gothic romance, and then I'll let you guys peruse the last couple slides by yourself. There's not too much. I'll try to like glance through them as much as I can. But you'll have to kind of go through the last couple, I think, alone. We'll see. But Gothic romance versus Gothic horror. There is romance in Gothic horror, and there is horror in Gothic romance. But the difference is the overall plot of the story. So there is, think about Jane Eyre and Dracula. Jane Eyre, there's a lot of like horrible things that happen. Like specifically, there's a fire that is set at the house, and the locked away life of Rochester gets out, and there's like some attempted murder in there as well. So there are like horrible elements to it, but it's still a romance story. Whereas in Dracula, a vampire is obviously trying to like come over to England and like vampirize people. But there's also still a romantic subplot between Mina and Jonathan Harker, the main characters. Well, the main character and his love interest in the story. So both have those elements to them, but the overarching story can be vastly different. But they both will have those elements of horrible things or horror, and then the romance. If you kind of think about it as like a Venn diagram, we got romance and we got horror, and the little circle in the middle, there's Gothic literature. So it takes both things, both other genres, like into account, and has both pieces involved in their writing. So additional romance elements, I'm just going to kind of click through these, and you guys can pause to read. Distressed heroine, Byronic hero, talked about a little bit. There's also secondary love interest in the romance part of the Gothic stories. Always a triangle, never fully a triangle, because like there's not attraction between these two, but the hero is in love with the girl, and so is secondary love interest, or the girl is in love with the hero, but there's also secondary love interest for the hero, but that's usually the girl. So other examples of that. And then the rest of the slides, there's examples of Gothic romance and Gothic horror that you guys can look through if you want to. For some recs or some other ideas of like to get an idea of what this genre is. But I will cut it off here. Thank you guys so much for today. I hope that you have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.